Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say once again joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
Thank you. So viewers, this episode is Depth of Deception, episode 225. Thank you for joining us today, and let's start this with an observation from Padre John Ruffle. A very welcome episode, and the care in which you put forward and present points is excellent. It is particularly refreshing to hear Richard admit toward the end of today's session that anything is possible, including a scenario where the cutoff switches may not have moved at all. I'm glad you have rowed back a little on this, as I seem to recall you insisting that the cutoff switches had moved. Maybe one reason you've softened your stance is because we are now seeing the depth of deception that the preliminary report attempted to pass off as fact to an unsuspecting public. They obviously were not counting on your depth of knowledge and research capabilities. Keep up the good work, please. Richard.
Yeah, well, that's a long story, Padre John Ruffle. We've changed our view because we can no longer trust anything stated in the preliminary report. We've said all along the preliminary report raised more questions than answers. We have pointed out what was missing and the inconsistencies. But then we discovered errors and outright lies. And then we hear of the three legal challenges from the father of the captain, from the Flight Safety NGO, and from the Pilots Association. And we understand the Supreme Court is listening to all of these cases. We suspected all along a cover-up and misinformation campaign was underway, but this has been confirmed by these legal challenges and the call for an independent investigation. We have now reached the point where we cannot accept anything at face value in the preliminary report. The FTR, CVR, and maintenance data has not been released to back up the statements portrayed as facts with specific timings from the FTR in the preliminary report. Quote the two key paragraphs. The first one, as per the EAFR data, the aircraft crossed the takeoff decision speed V1 and achieved 153 knots, IAS at 080833 UTC. The VR speed, 155 knots, was achieved as per the EAFR at 080835 UTC. The aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned to air mode consistent with liftoff at 080839 UTC. Now, that paragraph is objective, technical, neutral, and in line with the ICAO standards for a preliminary report. The next paragraph, however, changes all of that. The aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots IAS at about 080842 UTC, and immediately thereafter the engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff position, one after another with a time gap of 1 second. The engine N1 and N2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engine was cut off. In the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, "Why did he get cut off?" And the other pilot responded that he did not do so. So the point I would like to make is the first paragraph meets the ICAO standards: objective, technical, neutral, no interpretive commentary, simply a structured chronology with timestamps from the EAFR data. And I took that as face value when I initially analyzed it. However, I can no longer take it at face value, although it is a very factual uh, uh, statement supported by timestamps from the EAFR. The second paragraph fails to meet the ICAO standards. It is ambiguous, dramatic, emotional, and attributes action of cutoff without specifying what was cut off. And there is no mention of the word fuel or the word switches in that cutoff reported dialogue. Were the fuel switches moved, or did the fuel switch function simply transition? The language is deliberately ambiguous. And the ICAO states that a report must remain strictly factual. ICAO Annex 13 cautions against assigning blame, interpreting human intent, or introducing speculation or judgmental language. And the preliminary report fails on all three counts to adhere to the ICAO standard. Now, I don't, Padre John, go around accusing people of outright lies and deception before I've established the facts. In my view, I have now established that there is deception, ambiguous statements, and it is misleading, what is stated in the preliminary report. So I've changed my view.
And now, Richard, this comment from Studio Pop sets the tone for today. The inexorable role of heads in the Air India crash investigation cover-up can be visualised as the bowling ball slowly and precisely rolling towards the huddled pins. This episode captured the global impact of the AAIB bias. The questions answered added more depth to the previous detailed analysis of those subjects. Of course, Fred Rogers, from early on in your 171 series, I became aware of an interesting parallel between your show and Mr. Rogers' neighbourhood. At the beginning of every program, Fred would say hello, remove his street shoes for slippers, I forgot, change his jacket for a knitted sweater made by his mother, and then proceed to present the show content. So Richard and Geoffrey, your studied yet warm greeting to each other does precisely the same thing as Fred's intro. It says, hi, relax, I'm going to be here a while, focusing on you. A pleasant, warm, interesting time is ahead. And you are my special guest. Yeah, nice. Don't know how it came about, but it really sets the tone and invites us in. Richard.
Oh, a lovely comment. Thank you for that. I don't know how the good morning, good afternoon thing came about, but I think it's just a natural thing because we're based in different time zones and in different parts of the world. I guess it became a bit of a gag because we wanted to emphasize the global viewership that we enjoy. I've actually never heard of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but I can tell you that my wife has knitted me a scarf for the cold winter days that are coming in the northern hemisphere. And so I'll be wearing that if it gets chilly around the gills. And our goal is to invite participation from viewers, and this community has a large number of experts in the field of aviation and engineering and technology. And I have to say, it's a delight to interact with this community.
It is indeed. Christopher Glover, 8048. I can only assume the NTSB and the AAIB UK are satisfied that the root cause of the crash is restricted to the conditions of the Air India fleet. Air India can therefore quietly fix the fleet. Once the truth comes out, they can say, already fixed, let's move on. By this time, public media interest has waned and Air India have got away with it. Of course, legal action might prevent this, and we have to hope so. If the root cause of the crash is not restricted to the Air India fleet, then there will be rightly a huge scandal in the US and the UK. Richard, good thought.
Yeah, an interesting point. I would say there is a sort of admission in the fact that four Air India Boeing 787 aircraft were taken out of service and they have now returned to service. So, there were obviously issues that were being fixed on those four, but there are six still currently out of service. And out of those six, four 787-8 plus and one 787-9, where the lease was terminated, appear to be long-term out of service. And it is clear that the inspections of the entire 787 fleet of Air India, which was ordered after the crash on the 12th of June 2025, have found a significant number of issues. And some of those have been fixed, but others not yet. It is not clear, however, what progress has been made with the upgrade program, which is carrying on separately. The first aircraft, VTANT, flew to Victorville, California, but then it reappeared on test flights back in India, but has not returned to normal service. So there is no transparency in what is going on with all of these various 787s being taken out of service and shipped to Singapore or Oman or to Etihad Engineering in Abu Dhabi and elsewhere for repairs. So it's quite a lot still to come out on this story. So there we go, Christopher.
Hmm. Richard, our friend Sky King has come back with another great observation and comment this time, which I think is relevant. He says, "Dear Geoffrey and Richard, greetings. It is truly an honour that you, as the expert hosts, took the time to consider my analysis and observations in this episode and to weave them into your discussion with such depth. Having my points carried forward in your expert conversation is both humbling and deeply valuable to me. To add further to my comment post earlier, the QRH dual engine failure drill is designed for a situation where there is some altitude and kinetic energy to trade. What makes 171 incident so unique is the clustering of events like both engines spooling down virtually together within seconds of liftoff, the FDR showing fuel switch transitions to cut off within 1 second of each other, and the likely auto relight logic triggering precisely at the point where the rat power stabilised at 08:08:52 UTC. This whole above sequence of events and its timeline strongly hint at a systemic or logic-driven pathway rather than a manual, uncoordinated dual action by the pilots. The challenge here is that this kind of successive dual flameout on a 787 during initial climb is unprecedented. In my opinion, the regulators and investigative bodies would definitely therefore will work through every layer: electrical cascades, FSOV architecture, solenoid valve response under total power loss, and or possible spurious logic commands before pinning it solely on a single cause, including human action. The FSOV actuators losing power during the cascade is likely the main key event. Once the rat spooled up completely and came online, it restored AC and DC essential power. The valves were re-energized and the fuel flow could resume, allowing the FADEX to initiate auto relight. The DFDR discrete run cutoff run transitions could reflect valve state changes that rather than literal lever movement. Given the complexity of the 787's electrical and FADEC pathways, all alternative plausible technical scenarios need to be looked into from every angle possible. Richard.
Yeah, very good comment. And a dual engine shutdown at low altitude and low airspeed is not supposed to happen. The Air India crash has proven it can happen. And as you say, this is without precedent. Once the FTR data is published, we will be able to work through each layer of the system architecture to establish the root cause and the subsequent chain of events and work out exactly how this event did happen. And this is essential to making sure it does not happen again. And I completely agree with you. All alternative, plausible technical scenarios need to be looked into from every angle possible. And that will take some time.
Scott Pugsley asks, does your analysis of the evidence rule out intentional pilot action to crash the aircraft, or does your analysis merely provide another possibility? Isn't it still possible that the final conclusion will be that the pilot did it intentionally and wrongly? Thanks, Richard.
Well, in my view, a pilot suicide is ruled out completely. And I'll give you 12 reasons why I believe that. Number one, the basic rule of aviate, navigate, communicate was followed. Number two, an optimum glide path was achieved despite the dual engine shutdown. Number three, the standard procedure in the case of a dual engine shutdown was followed. Number four, the engines were both successfully relit. Number five, the cockpit communication regarding cutoff could refer to the first officer's instruments and displays, and not, as many have believed, to the fuel switches. And point six, I think, is for me the key one. At takeoff thrust, when both engines are operating fully, the aircraft is accelerating during the runway takeoff roll and during the initial climb. The maximum airspeed would have been reached after the fuel switches were moved to cutoff and not before, as per the preliminary report. If the narrative of the preliminary report is to be believed, that is, the statement in the preliminary report is illogical. Airspeed will start to reduce after thrust is lost, not before thrust is lost. And I think at that point, I lost it with the preliminary report. So I carry on. Number seven, the APU auto start sequence was commenced. Number eight, the landing gear was left extended to minimize impact damage. And point nine, the captain took over as the pilot flying, as only his instruments and displays were powered. Number 10, the captain tried to reach the road beside the BJ Medical Hospital for a forced landing. Point 11, the captain would not have promised his father, I will call you when I get to London, and I'm going to leave my job and look after you. And point 12, the AAIB did not have to visit the captain's father to say that his son deliberately, intentionally, nefariously moved the fuel switches to cut off unless they felt their conclusion was on shaky ground. They tried to trick a 91-year-old into buying into their narrative by blinding the father with technical jargon about a layered cockpit recorder voice analysis. And let me just explain what a layered cockpit recorder voice analysis is. The first layer is the technical acoustic layer. You transcribe the speech verbatim. You don't make any interpretation of it. You identify the speakers, the overlaps, and the non-verbal sounds. You note any ambient sounds, alerts, engine noise, switch clicks, alarms, etc. Layer 2 is the operational procedural layer. You map the dialogue and the sounds against checklists, callouts, and procedures. You identify omissions or deviations, or indeed correct compliance with the procedures. You synchronize with the FDR data where that is available. The third layer is the interaction communication layer. You look at the tone and the timing and the assertiveness and hesitation and stress markers. You note interruptions, overlapping speech, lack of acknowledgement. You assess decision-making dynamics between the captain and the first officer. The fourth layer is the cognitive behavioral layer. You identify signs of confusion, fixation, the startle effect, or overload. You track shifts in attention or prioritization. And the fifth layer is the contextual organizational layer. You consider fatigue, training, culture, company standard operating procedures, ATC environment. You examine stresses and external to the flight deck. And I ask you, do you think a 91-year-old father is the appropriate person to evaluate his own son's layered cockpit voice analysis? I'm sorry, but the AAIB made a big mistake on that one.
Yeah, a very big mistake. Gregory Clifford, 6938, asks a good question that many viewers may not be aware of. Why are the hazards of water ingress and lithium overruns unique to the design of the 787? It is understood that so much more of the plane is electronics, but the plumbing and batteries for other Boeing planes must be similar. How wrong is that? Richard.
Yeah, well, the water hazards on the 787 are no different from any other Boeing or any Airbus design. The issue is not about the design of these aircraft. The issue is about following airworthiness directives and service bulletins. And until we get the maintenance logs, which prove that the maintenance work was correctly done on each of these airworthiness directives and service bulletins, then to me, I'm afraid I don't have the transparency that is required.
Yep. Ken KB4TM. Thank you, gentlemen, for your daily unbiased broadcast. My only observation is that why, oh why, are Boeing, after 12 years, still using lithium-ion chemistry when LIFE PO4 is a much safer battery chemistry, complete with its own battery management system, BMS. Lithium-ion batteries are intrinsically a volatile explosive time bomb, notwithstanding its encasement in a stainless steel enclosure. Richard, I know we've covered this, but let's get a fresh update from you on this one.
Yeah. The shift towards the MEA, more electric aircraft, and even further, the AEA, the all-electric aircraft architectures, has transformed modern jets into flying power plants, in effect. A Boeing 787, for example, produces 1.45 megawatt of electrical power, nearly 5 times that of a Boeing 767. The power on a 787 is supplied by 6 250 kVA generators. There are 2 in each engine and 2 in the APU. And they're feeding 270 volt DC and 115 volt 230 volt AC systems. And once you turn an aircraft into a megawatt class electrical plant, the batteries stop being just for the emergency lights and the radios, as on older jets, and they become a critical backbone for the system reliability and power continuity. The main and APU batteries on the 787 are 32 volt DC, 75 ampere hour batteries. They each have 8 lithium-ion cells in series, and the total rating is 2.4 kilowatt hours. We mentioned yesterday the max for each passenger is 160 watt hours, so we're up to 2,400 watt hours in the case of the main and APU batteries. Now, you're quite right to point out battery technology has moved on significantly in the last 12 years since the 787 was designed. And if you was to design a commercial airliner today, I don't think you would choose lithium-ion battery technology. And if I was selecting a battery technology today, I'd consider, as you have proposed, the lithium iron phosphate, much higher thermal stability, lower risk of runaway, lower energy density, and very good safety critical track record. There's also the lithium titanate, the LTO battery, extremely safe, long cycles life, very fast charging, and has also several benefits. There's also the nickel metal hydride, NIMH, or the advanced nickel cadmium, proven safety, but of course much heavier, and weight is a big consideration. You can also consider hybrid systems. So I would propose a retrofit program with lithium iron phosphate for the existing 787 global fleet. Now, that is an extremely expensive and time-consuming retrofit program. And there are still key hurdles to clear. One with the major issues with the lithium iron phosphate is the cold weather APU start certification without preheat power from the ground. Another, which you've mentioned, is the charger compatibility. It will likely need a new unit on software and hardware mods. And the biggest hurdle is proving no propagation and meeting the letter of the 787 lithium special conditions and AD history post 2013. So, nice idea, but practically it will take a lot of doing and a lot of money.
So, Richard, Yoda B.AT 1746, with all the actions taken immediately after the crash, i.e. clearing the site, and all the inactions thereafter, I would begin to suspect that Air India anticipated problems with that particular aircraft before the crash happened. Perhaps they were well aware of maintenance issues, especially given their actions regarding the so-called refit going on with the remaining fleet of 787s. The previous flight logs should be examined with a microscope.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And that is why we keep calling for the maintenance logs to be published and released to the public.
Neil Hales, 4693. It would be interesting to know the timing of the comment, "Why did you cut off?" relative to other events such as the loss of instrument display power, RAT deployment and fuel cut-off switch movement. What you would expect would be fuel cut-off followed by voice comment with nearly contemporaneous initialization of RAT deployment. Would the co-pilot's microphone work once he lost instrument display power, or was the comment heard over the pilot's microphone? Richard.
Yeah, the main battery as a backup powers both pilots' audio communication systems. So there would be no loss of any communication and no loss of recording by the CVR. And I think it is very telling that the preliminary report does not give the timing of the communication from the pilots and between the pilots. And there must be a reason why they omitted that particular.
Joe Costaca, 1298. Richard, please help me understand this one point about fuel switches. It has been commented by seemingly technically informed posters that it is possible for the fuel switches to have never been moved, but the FDR would have recorded that they were toggled to cut off. Is this possible? The reason for my question is that I understand there is a dedicated circuit that only records a manual repositioning of the fuel cut-off switches. If the switches were never moved and the FDR nevertheless recorded a manual movement, how could the FDR have recorded a manual movement of the switches on a dedicated circuit? Again, thank you and Geoffrey for your invaluable contributions to uncovering this disaster's true cause. Richard.
Yeah, Joe, I think you're putting your finger on exactly the point of what has confused almost every analyst that has read the preliminary report. And I'm not sure that anyone can actually answer the question that you're asking. There are at least three possible ways of interpreting the statement in the preliminary report concerning the fuel switches. And number one, the fuel switches were never touched, and we're talking about the fuel switch function, but not the physical switch movement. And number two, the fuel switches were physically moved, but that had no effect because of electrical failures downstream to the relays and the valves that are operated by the fuel switches. And the third possibility, the fuel switches were physically moved and they did operate the relays and valves, but the engines had already shut down for another electrical reason. So it is highly confusing, and I'm not sure anyone can state with certainty exactly what happened. And not that is until we get the full FDR, CVR, and maintenance log data made available publicly. And the preliminary report, I think, is designed to confuse and was successful in doing so.
Yeah, sure was. Richard, let's conclude with this comment from John Isley, 4578. I believe that you guys are inundated with questions and emails, as viewers can evidently recognise the professionalism and impactful responses that are provided. And I count myself among those viewers. Excellent episode, gentlemen. Richard, we sure are. And it's humbling, is it not?
Very, very humbling. And yes, John, we do get a lot of questions and emails, not just on Air India, not just on MH370, not just on the 737 MAX, but I've received emails on just about every accident in the history of aviation where someone has been affected by it and lost a family member and wanted to get to the bottom of a particular investigation. So we have a long list. We could write a book by just putting a couple of thousand emails together.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting exercise.
Now, Sapien Space Unedited, aka John from Arizona, says, Richard, this is the first time I have heard you be open to the possibility that the fuel switches did not get moved during takeoff. Thank you for being open to the possibility. I suspect it may be part of an arc flash cascade failure causing fuel switch state sensing to fail via a voltage spike on common ground on all fuel switch discrete or default boot sequence sensing memory state as cutoff. I sent you an email from my backup Gmail account about the possibility of only one of about three data validity requirements being met on the avionics full duplex AFDX interface to the RDCs and about the 51-day airworthiness directive requirement. Hope this comment will not get deleted. John from Arizona.
Well, there you go, John. The comment didn't get deleted. And your emails didn't get deleted either. Still analyzing the email you kindly sent, and I'll get back to you in the next couple of days, hopefully.
So, Richard, let's conclude with these comments. Classic Roach, you guys have painstakingly dissected and analysed the crash for months. Your total impartiality and open mind makes you exponentially more credible than the architects of the report. I appreciate that your bottom line doesn't mince words. The pressure is on. And Ming Blues, I continue to follow as all of us have an interest in honest reporting of serious events because that is the only assurance we have that our lives are not put at risk due to correctable errors. Thank you and be joyful. Richard and Geoffrey, thank you for your reporting on the admirable action of the FIP. The AAIB merits an award for the most confusing, purposely deceitful and irresponsible preliminary report to date. That's
Yeah.
yeah, be
Well,
joyful.
I agree with that statement.
Yeah, indeed. So, Richard, look, thank you very much indeed for answering those questions from the viewers today. Some pretty powerful stuff, some very probing and excellent questions from our viewers.
Yeah, indeed, excellent questions, and keep them coming. We'll be up for it.
Yeah, we certainly are. Now, viewers, tomorrow we're taking a day off. Sorry about that. And on Sunday we're coming back with the third or fourth, forget now, episode in the 737 MAX series, and that is going to cover the Lion Air crash. I'm sure you'll be interested in that, and we do invite you to tune in on Sunday and join us as we walk you through that complex and tragic crash. So, Richard, thank you once again.
You're welcome.
And viewers, please do subscribe to us. Please like us. Please do join us. And please keep those wonderful comments coming. They're chicken soup for the soul, I can assure you. And do keep those fabulous questions coming. They do challenge us, but we're up for it, as Richard said. And we look forward to your company on Sunday. Take care and have a great weekend.